In this webcast, I'm going to run through a BizTalk server Multibox install on virtual machines using 3 servers for the configuration. It's very similar to the actual labs that we do on the Quick Learn BizTalk Server Administrators course. I'll mention a bit more about that course at the end. It's going to be level 300 because it's quite a time-consuming process. I'm going to whiz through things very quickly, and I won't have time to explain exactly what I'm doing. But if you've worked with administrative tasks on Windows and in SQL Server, you'll understand what's going on. It also helps if you have done a few developer installs of BizTalk Server in single environments. So this is the environment that I'm using. Washington is going to be the domain controller. So we've got SQL Server 2005 installed in there. We've also got Active Directory, and that's where I'm going to be hosting all of the domain accounts. Also, I'm going to install the Enterprise Single Sign-On Master Secret Server on Washington. It's the domain is Quick Learn. We've set that up as the Quick Learn domain in a virtual environment. We've also got 2 servers that we're going to be using with BizTalk Server. Dublin is going to be the first BizTalk server in the BizTalk Server group, and we're going to use that to create the BizTalk Server group. And then Melbourne is going to be the second BizTalk server in the group, and we're going to use the join group option when we install and configure Melbourne. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is to start off preparing the platform. And this is the machine that I'm going to be using for this. This is a server named Washington, and it's going to be hosting Active Directory for all of the user accounts. It's going to be acting as a database server for the BizTalk server group, and I'm also going to be hosting the Enterprise Single Sign-On Master Secret Server on this machine, and we'll talk about that a bit later on. The first thing I'm going to have to do is to generate all of the user accounts and groups for BizTalk to run on. And as I mentioned before, it's going to be a simplified installation of BizTalk, just the core messaging infrastructure. I've got these 3 users and these 6 groups I'm going to generate, and I'm going to use the same password for all of the users. Now, I find it handy to have everything in this notepad file, and what I'm going to do is copy paste these in when I generate the users, and then copy paste them again when I configure BizTalk server, just to make sure I've got everything exactly right there, and the configuration goes a lot more smoothly if you do that. So I'm going to start in the administrative tools and start with the Active Directory users and computers, and use this to actually generate all of the BizTalk groups. I'm going to generate a new organisational unit, which is going to be named BizTalk, and that will allow me to keep all of the BizTalk users and groups in the same place. You don't have to do that, I'm just doing that for convenience. So first thing is to generate the users. I'm going to copy the SSO service account there, generate a new user, paste in SSO service in the first name and the user logon name, go into the next section. I'm going to copy the password from Notepad and paste this in both of these boxes here. We don't want the user to change the password because it's going to be a service, and I'm going to set user cannot change password. Password never expires as well, I'm going to set, so we won't get any problems with the service stopping running after a few months. Click on next and click on finish, and we've got the account for the SSO service generated. So next up is the BizTalk in-process user account here. So this one is going to be called BTS host. And I'm going to copy paste the same password. I'm using the same password for all of these accounts. Next one is the one for the isolated hosts. So I'm going to paste in BizTalk ISO host as the username. Take the same password again, and make those settings in the checkboxes and click on finish. Next up is the groups. There's 6 groups that we're going to be generating, 2 for single sign-on, 2 for the BizTalk services, and 2 for the various administrators and operators that are going to be present on this BizTalk group. The names that I'm using, incidentally, these match the sort of default configuration names that BizTalk server is expecting, so it keeps things consistent across your environments, and also makes things a lot easier when you're running for the running through the configuration screens. So it's recommended to use these. So we've got our 2 SSO groups, a new group here called BizTalk Server Administrators. This is for anyone who has full administrative control over the BizTalk group. We also have another group called BizTalk Server Operators, and this one is for people who have sort of restricted permissions over the BizTalk Server service group. And for the BizTalk accounts, we have a couple of groups: BizTalk Application Users for the in-process host, BizTalk Isolated Host Users for the isolated groups, and click on OK. We need to set a bit of membership here, so I'm going to go into the BizTalk application users, and we're going to have to add the BizTalk host account. In the isolated host users, I'm going to add the isolated host account. BizTalk server administrators, I'm going to add the domain administrator. And if you're doing this in a real world environment, you maybe want to add your own administrator account here, so you don't have to log on as a domain administrator all the time. BizTalk server operators, we can place members in this group who are going to be working at an operative level with BizTalk server, so they won't have full control. I'm going to leave this blank in this installation. SSO administrators, I'm going to add the BizTalk administrator, the domain administrator account here, and also the SSO service account here. Okay, so everything's done now with creating my users and my groups. So the next thing we're going to do is to generate the databases. I'm doing a simplified install, so I'm just going to generate these 4 databases. Again, I've got the names here so I can copy and paste them. I'm going to copy the MGMT DB name. A couple of tips here. Always try and use the same database names as BizTalk is expecting. We have these default database names that I'm going to be using. Typically, when you install BizTalk server, when you create your group, it will generate all these databases for you. But if you want an optimal install, you should always pre-size these and always set them to run on specific locations. I've got a data folder and a logs folder on my C drive here, but realistically you'd be placing them on different drives within a SQL Server machine to get the best performance. You'd want to change the autogrowth settings. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to leave them as they are, and I'm going to go down here and select the actual file locations. So this gives you a lot more control when you're actually generating your databases as to whereabouts these are going to be placed, and it's good practice to do this instead of just allowing the BizTalk server to create them with the default sizes there. So I'm going to click on OK to generate the management database. And that one's been created. I'm going to pause the recording whilst I generate the other 3 databases because that is exactly the same procedure. So I've now got 4 databases, the management, the message box, the tracking database, and the enterprise single sign-on credentials database. You can see in the data section that I've set 50 meg for the tracking and the message box, and 10 meg for management and SSODB. Same in the log size. I've given the message box and the tracking database more log space available. It's typical that you would do that, but the sizes that I'm using are not realistic. Because I'm working on a virtual machine, I'm not going to bother setting sort of really large databases because that's going to slow down the virtual machines. And the last thing we need to do on this server is to configure the distributed transaction coordinator. BizTalk server is going to make quite a lot of use of this when it's running in a multi-server environment. We need to make sure these settings are set correctly, or we will have issues when we try to configure our group. So I'm going to quickly go in here into component services, bring up the DTC configuration. Sometimes you notice that the tab doesn't appear there first time you select it. But if you do it again, you should see the MSDTC settings up in there. I'm going to go into the security configuration and just make these actual selections here. These are quite well documented in the BizTalk server documentation. What I'm doing is just allowing access for the distributed transaction coordinator, and this is disabled by default. So I'm going to OK that. That's going to restart the DTS service. And I'm going to OK that. And we should be good to go for creating our group now. Okay, I'm also going to install the Enterprise Single Sign-On Master Secret Server in Washington 1, and that means that we don't have, one of the BizTalk servers being the single point of failure, and we're pretending that Washington is going to be an active passive cluster, and it's good to have the Enterprise Single Sign-On Master Secret Server installed in there. So I'm just going to whiz quickly through the BizTalk server setup. I'm going to install BizTalk server. You've probably seen this maybe 10 or 20 times if you've worked with BizTalk regularly. But things are slightly different when we go into this multi-server environment. So I'm going to go in here, accept the licensing agreement, and I'm going to do sort of quite a minimal selection here. I'm not going to have the server runtime. I'll keep the documentation here because I'm also going to use Washington as an administration console. Not going to install any of the portal components. I will have the admin tools installed. and in the additional software selection I'm going to set the Enterprise Single Sign-On Administration and the Enterprise Single Sign-On Master Secret Server. I think I'll just double check that's all I need to have on this box. I'm going to click on Next. Now the cabinet file I've got downloaded. I'm working with local only networking here, so I can't grab it and download it from the internet. So in the actual lab section we've got the cabinet file for that, which is this one here, and I'm going to click on Next and click on Install. I'm going to pause the recording whilst it runs through this install. Okay, so the install went successfully and I've got the checkbox here to launch BizTalk's configuration. So I'm going to go straight into the configuration wizard. Okay, so we've got the server name as being Washington here, and I'm going to do a custom configuration of this and set the values myself, and to go in and click on Configure. So what we're going to set is just the Enterprise Single Sign-On system. I'm going to enable Enterprise Single Sign-On. I'm going to create a new group, and it's picked up that we do have the SSODB, and this is the name for it here. This is why it's so important to use the default database names. BizTalk server will select these. What I need to select is the actual user account, and this is where the actual notepad comes in handy with all the usernames and passwords in here. So I'm going to go in here, I'm going to actually copy the password into the clipboard, go in here and browse down for the username in the entire directory, and I think if I type SSO it will pick up that we're using the SSO service at user account, and I'm going to paste in the password there. I'm also going to paste the domain name here and just copy this into the clipboard and click on OK for that account. Now by default we're using local groups here, and what I'm going to do is just paste in the quick learn / there to specify that these are going to be the domain groups. Again, because I've used the sort of predefined default domain names, those will match, and we're not going to get any errors there. Now we need to back up our Enterprise Single Sign-On Master Secrets. What I'm going to do is to go into the C drive and generate a new folder called BizTalk Backup. And I'm going to generate a folder here called Master Secret. So this is where I'm going to actually back up this. In 2004 it didn't do this by default, but here we do it in the configuration. So I'm going to do a very simple password. Try and get it right in all the boxes. And specify that we're actually going to back up these secrets in that location that I've just generated there. Now later on we may have the option of restoring this secret if you want to experiment with that, and it's great to know whereabouts it is. So in the group section we're not going to create a BizTalk group, we're not going to do anything with BAM here. I'm just going to click on Apply Configuration here, and that's going to whiz through and configure the Enterprise Single Sign-On service. And that was done successfully fairly quickly, so I can click on Finish. And just go in and check that the service is running. So I'm going into the admin tools and taking the services section here, and we're looking for the actual service, which is the SSO, or Enterprise Single Sign-On service, and that does seem to be up and running. Another check that you can do is to go into the administrative tools and into the event viewer, and in the application section you will get the Enterprise Single Sign-On service recording information talking about how it's working with the Master Secret server, and we should see that it has actually started and it is running successfully. You will see errors and warnings if there is any kind of issue with the Master Secret server. Okay, so with everything installed on Washington, the Enterprise Single Sign-On and the databases and the actual users and groups for BizTalk server, I'm going to switch over to Dublin. Now Dublin is going to be the first BizTalk server that is going to be present in this group. Incidentally, this has no connection with Dublin, the codename for the process server. We didn't know they were going to call it that, and if we had done, we'd have called this server something else. It does cause a bit of confusion, but it is actually just the name of the server that we're using there. I'm going to log on to this machine, and what's important here is we have to log on as the domain administrator rather than the local administrator. So with that made, I'm going to run through the actual installation of BizTalk server on this machine. So I've got a network share set up on Washington. Not a network share actually, but I've got access to the actual drive here. So if I go down onto Washington and take the Z drive, American keyboard always confuses me. We should be able to go into the Lab 2 section and find the actual BTS installation. So we're actually going to run this over the network. Double clicking on setup.exe. Now I'm going to do a fairly limited installation of the BizTalk features. I'm not going to install everything. That's going to take a long time, and it is going to be quite complex, especially when I'm running sort of 3 virtual machines on the same platform. Things do run a bit slowly. So I'm going to whiz through the default settings, accept the license agreement here, and go in and make the actual selections. I'll keep the documentation on here in case we need it, and we've got the server runtime here, but I'm not going to install the EDI and AS2 or the Windows Communication Foundation stuff. I'm not going to install the portal components. I haven't set up IIS on here, and I'm going to keep the administration tools but not the Windows Communication Foundation ones. Additional software, I can install Business Rules Engine if I want to, but I haven't created the database for that, so I'll just leave that one off there. Click on Next. Again, I've got this cabinet file, which I can browse down to here, and just take that, and click on Next, and click on Install. And I'll pause the recording whilst this runs. So the install went fine. I'm just going to briefly check that we've got the correct settings on the distributed transaction coordinator on this machine, because these will need to match the ones that we've got on the SQL box. And just going in here, I'm going to quickly click on the button here to bring up these configurations in MSDTC, just checking the security configuration, and we have got those settings made for us already. So in the BizTalk configuration, I'm going to do a custom configuration. The database server name is going to be Washington, and I'm going to click on the configure button to go through and make the various settings. It's going to be slightly different to when you're doing an administrator, a regular developer machine, for a couple of reasons. On a dev box, you typically use local admin for everything, and in this configuration, we're going to use the domain accounts and the domain databases. Okay. So in Enterprise Single Sign-On, I'm going to enable Enterprise Single Sign-On. And it's erroring out here because we've got the SSODB that is already being used. I've got the Enterprise Single Sign-On Master Secret Server on Washington. So instead of creating a new Single Sign-On system, I'm going to join the existing one on Washington. And I'm going to need to actually paste in my usernames and passwords. So I've got these in Notepad, but I've added on the Quick Learn domain in front of the various usernames and groups, so I can make the modifications easier. So taking the SSO service account here, I'm going to go in and configure this, paste in SSO service and paste in the password. And that's accepted there. Go into the group section. Now I'm going to enable BizTalk group on this computer, and I'm going to create a new BizTalk server group. So the databases, because we've used the default names, are all matching the ones that we've got on Washington. And the change I need to make here is copying the Quick Learn domain name and pasting it in front of both of these Windows groups. So they're going to be the domain groups instead of the local groups. And I've used the actual default group names here, so that means that they will actually match, and you can see the icon changes and we lose the error when we do actually match with the domain groups. They do need to exist. Going into BizTalk runtime, I'm going to register the runtime components here, and what I need to do here is specify both the accounts and the groups here. So I'm going to take the BizTalk host account and use that for the BizTalk in process. So that's for the host instance. Then the isolated host account is going to use the BizTalk ISO host account. And then the groups, I just need to add the prefix for the Quick Learn domain name on these two groups. And we're done. Because I'm just doing the basic components, I don't need to worry about BAM or Business Rules Engine. Before I apply the configuration, I'm just going to export it because we can actually use this configuration when we're doing the join group option. So I'm going to generate a new folder here which I'll call config, and we're going to save this as create group config. So I'm going to take the apply configuration. I'll pause the virtual machine whilst we're going through this section, because it's going to take about sort of 4 or 5 minutes to run. It's quite slow on virtual machines. So everything went fine with that. We've got all of these 4 features configured. You will quite often, if you don't get the DTC settings correct, or there's some security settings, see errors occurring in that section. The log file, if you actually find the error and then sort of paste this into a search engine, it usually brings you onto something that's quite giving you a good description of the problem. The log file itself is not that, it's quite hard to actually figure out what the issues are when you look at the log file. So I'm on Melbourne now, which is the second BizTalk server that I'm going to join the group with, and this is going to be slightly different to the configuration that we did on Dublin. So going into the actual configuration for BizTalk server 2006, I'm actually going to make the join group option. We already have all of the BizTalk server databases populated now, and what I need to do is to add this second server into the BizTalk server group, still using all of those databases. So the configuration is going to be slightly different than we did before. I'm going to choose custom configuration. Database server name is going to be Washington again, and I'm going to click on configure. Now, because when I did my create group configuration, I saved that XML configuration file, I can actually import that configuration file when I'm using the join group option, and that will set a lot of the user groups and pass names and databases. And if you're joining several servers in a group, this allows us to have sort of great consistency here. So I'm going to take the import configuration, click on OK there, just paste in the path. I actually moved it onto the Washington share, so I've got access to it there. And this is the create group config that I saved out from my first configuration. Now it's going to be slightly different. We're going to need to make a few changes to this, because this will have all the options set to create the group, so we'll need to change it to take the join group option. Another thing, when you export the configuration, it does not persist all of the actual passwords for us, so we will need to go in and set some passwords here. So when we're working with the single sign-on system, again I'm using my notepad here. I'm just going to copy the password there, and I need to set the password for the enterprise single sign-on account here. Paste in that, that's good to go. In the group section now, this is saying create a group. I actually want to join an existing BizTalk server group. That's already present, so that's all I need to set there. In the BizTalk runtime, I need to set the 2 passwords. Okay, and the second one for the isolated host. And that's it. Take the apply configuration. Just accept the confirmation dialog box, and it will run through and do this. This will be quite a bit quicker than the first option, because we already have all the databases created, and joining a group will not take as much time as creating one. I'm going to pause the video anyway. Okay, that went fine, and it was quite quick as well. I'm going to click on finish here. Now, I didn't do this on the first BizTalk server. What I very often do here is just confirm that these services are running. So in the services control panel, we're looking for the actual BizTalk server service, which is this one here, and that seems to be started okay. Also, the enterprise single sign-on service is up and running fine. The event viewer will also give you the indication here. I've got the BizTalk service and the enterprise single sign-on service, just providing information that these services have started successfully. So on the Washington machine, I'm going to start the BizTalk server administration console, and that's going to give us a view of the actual BizTalk server group that we've created. Remember, I installed the admin tools on this machine here. So I'm going to connect to the group that I've got on here. The server name is Washington, and then in this drop-down list we should see the BizTalk management database appearing in the database name drop-down. And click on OK. So now we can go into the platform settings and just check firstly in the servers and see if we have got 2 servers present in the BizTalk group. So you can see Melbourne and Dublin are both there. Into the host section we've got the 2 hosts running, and in the host instances section we can see that we've got these servers running on both of these servers. So after we've got the completed install, there's still a few tasks that we should run through. We should enable the job to back up the BizTalk server databases, and also enable the job to purge and archive the tracking database. It's also good to just generate a simple test application and run some messages through just to verify that BizTalk server is up and running. I'm a bit short on time. I want to keep this as short as possible, so I'm not going to run through those tasks in this webcast. So if you liked what you saw in that lab, it may be worth popping along to one of the deliveries of the Quick Learn BizTalk Server Administrators courses. It's basically a 5-day course which is going to run through using the same types of environments, doing these multi-server installs. But you're also going to be looking at configuring the backup jobs, deploying to multi-server environments, working with single sign-on, using MOM in a multi-server environment, and also running through the BizTalk server disaster recovery procedures using BizTalk log shipping in a multi-server environment. So it's well worth running through those in a proper environment and having all of the instruction and theory to go with it. Further reading as well, Professional BizTalk Server 2006 has a great chapter on administration written by somebody called Ewan Fairweather, who's working with the BizTalk Rangers team. BizTalk Server documentation does provide a good overview of the administrative tasks. You can actually download the Special Operations Guide, which is a CHM file containing all of the operations stuff relevant to BizTalk Server. And I've also written a blog article that I posted a while ago on how you can build your own multi-server environments to do a BizTalk server multi-install. A couple of guidelines on using virtual machines. It's great for learning the procedures for actually running through and seeing basically how things work. You will need a high specification host system if you're going to be running 3 virtual machines concurrently. You could probably get away with 2 if you were only going to have 1 BizTalk server in the group. That will get you through most of the stuff. The join group is fairly simple to do, so you could probably get away with it with doing this on 2 servers. Use local only networking because we want to have the domain controller and the BizTalk servers talking to each other, so I set local only networking. I also make use of undo disks. You didn't see in the recording, but I did make a couple of errors on here and had to basically undo my changes, go back, start again, and do that task. So you will find you are making use of the undo disk, and it's a great way of being able to actually, if something goes wrong, you can just skip and go back to how it was and try again. With multi-server installs, it's kind of like the old days of BizTalk Server 2004. It's a bit challenging to get it right first time, so it's good to be able to just switch back and start again. Don't expect good performance when you're using 3 virtual machines on this same host PC. The performance is pretty terrible. I've been pausing the video every time something has been taking a long time, so it looked fairly performant on my machine, but you will find it is quite slow on a development on sort of if you're hosting these 3 machines yourself. Be patient and don't expect to see anything like BizTalk Server will perform in a multi-server environment. It's just good for running through sort of the basic procedures of how we're going to be running the Multibox install.